Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Project Flux. Today we have an interview with Cecilia Longstrom, who's going to talk about the recently published AI and the Built Environment report. Cecilia's from 𝗬𝗫𝗂𝗍 studio, and they commissioned a piece of research which was sponsored by the London Property Association. So that's the Westminster Property Association and the City Property Association. And there was a fabulous event I attended a few months ago now at 𝗂𝗶𝗳𝗶𝗶 offices in London to talk about this, and I asked Cecilia to come on, so she's going to come on and have a nice chat with us about the findings and the recommendations of the report. Before we do that, 𝗀𝗫𝗍 and I are going to quickly talk about the week's news, but before that I'd just like to give a big shout out to our new sponsors of the Project Flux show, Construct AI. And we'll put their details in the show notes. But one thing we said when we started this podcast was that we wouldn't have any sponsors that we didn't believe in ourselves. And Construct AI is a solution that both 𝗀𝗫𝗍 and I use almost daily. So please do check it out. It's super simple to use and it's super, super useful. So thank you to Construct AI. So 𝗀𝗫𝗍, how are you?
I'm excellent, mate. How are you?
I'm good. Holidays all done now, and looking forward to the run into the end of the year. And there's doesn't seem to be any dying down of the appetite to talk about artificial intelligence. I have about 3 or 4 speaking events over the course of the next 2 or 3 months. So it's ramping up as ever. And I think the latest newsletter that was just being published, there's some pretty big stories in there. And the one I first wanted to talk about was our week's big thing, which was OpenAI and Anthropic seem to be getting closer and closer to having some kind of agreement. This one's with the US government on AI safety and transparency, which I think is really important, that these things are always going on in the background, and there seems to be a move towards some solidification of what a safety policy looks like. Do you see this as something important or just more of the same, more noise?
I do see it as something which is quite important. So this agreement with the US and the UK AI Safety Institute marks a pivotal moment in a time where these big tech companies are under scrutiny because of the way that they're moving in terms of licensing data, scraping data, using it to train their models. There hasn't been a lot of visibility into how they do that. And there's also this question of, if we don't understand truly how we're developing our AI, we don't know what will happen at the end of it in terms of its divergent thinking. And it kind of lends to what 𝗲𝗏 said a bit more about, if we have this position that we can't control AI, we don't know what it's actually doing, it could be quite catastrophic. So there is this big need, and also emphasized by Elon Musk on this, is that we need to have visibility into what big tech is currently doing. And this also, I think it was this week, the Californian bill, or a few Californian bills were supposed to be put to the governor in terms of what they want to look out for in terms of regulating AI. And a few things have been proposed on that basis as well. So there was a few things like banning deepfakes, and making sure that deepfakes are taken down or removed from the internet, when we get near to elections. There's also a few things around protecting workers' rights. So you can't use AI avatars or voices to mimic, human actors and all these different things. So there's a big step in this direction to understanding, regulating, and also making sure that we are kind of recording our developments with AI and giving people, or some of these associations, the ability to test it before we release them.
Yeah, I think, in general, it's a good thing, but I always get the impression with these bills and these agreements that it's backwards looking. It's like, here's an issue, this is how we're going to solve it. And it's like plugging a hole in a leak, rather than looking forward, looking at where this is going and putting the barriers in place so that the development of the AI is in line with those barriers. And that's the bit for me that leaves me a little bit cold with these agreements. It's always, right, there's an issue. AI's created an issue. Let's plug that issue.
So you think it's kind of that they don't foresee it? They kind of, it's more like palliative. They're just kind of treating the symptoms as opposed to treating the cause. Sort of thing.
And I think that's, because it's very, very, even though there's a lot of people who can see where this is going, it's very, very difficult to sort of get the impetus to do something about it until it becomes a problem, especially in politics. So I think that's the reason why we end up in this position, almost always chasing our tails. And again, a lot of these agreements, I know you said it was the EU, but there's also the US government, but that still only represents a certain portion of the world. North Korea, China, these other countries doing? You know, if we're not putting those kind of safe measures in place globally, then in a way it doesn't matter what you're doing in the US or the UK, because we're only going to be as good as our weakest point.
Yeah, and also you're having to balance that regulation against the competition. Like you said, there's the arms race to develop at a global scale now across different countries. So I think there's that pressure in kind of where you fall, and you don't want to fall behind if you're America. You don't want to fall behind if you're the UK. So there's some of these different arguments. What I'd also like to mention in this space here is that when we spoke to Cecilia yesterday, she kind of mentioned that when they did the 𝗲𝗶𝗴𝗏 report, that it was AI is based on stipulation. It's very difficult to guess what will be in 5 to 10 years' time. So, you know, we are always kind of playing catch up in this extent. And again, actually echoing what Phil said from Construct AI is that when you spend, an hour in AI, it feels like a year. So there's so many things that do happen that trying to govern and regulate it is difficult. But what I would say is that it is OpenAI and Anthropic who have got these agreements with the US and the UK AI safety institutes. And they are committing to the cause in the sense that Anthropic have just released these system prompt guides. So it shows you in terms of how you can use the AI, what sort of questions they're getting, how it works. So it shows you the underpinnings. So that lends to us having a greater understanding. So then we can also then kind of foresee what will happen in the future with a bit more clarity.
Yeah. Well, listen, everyone, if you want to check out the newsletter, there's loads of links around that. The next news article was quite interesting, brought to my attention by Anthony Slumbers, who was our guest last week, for those listened in. And it was a recent study by CBRE, which I thought was really interesting because it actually showed that amongst researchers, that adoption of ChatGPT is surprisingly low. The study indicates that fewer than 10% of researchers use generative AI tools, which to me, you know, research is one of the number one use cases, even at this era of AI, where people should be using it. Yet we've still got this really, really low adoption rate. So what's going on there?
So I can kind of speak on this anecdotally, right? Because when I was doing my neuroscience course, I was using Google Scholar quite a bit. And the way that I got a lot of value from the information of what I was researching into was looking deep into the papers and reading it thoroughly. And I was taught once to always look over what these researchers are glossing over. So you have to have that critical thinking to really understand, you know, and find these rabbit holes where there's kind of these nuggets of insight, valuable information. Now, when you then come to use AI, what it does is it pulls the information which is kind of the most popular, right? So sometimes you might just take that as dogma and just listen to it and use that research, when in actual fact, you need to do a bit more digging. So I am kind of guilty of making sure that I actually use things like Google Scholar to go really deep into the research as opposed to using AI. And I think it depends on the field of research. So when they're saying that research is here within this CBRE study, it'll be good to know what sort of industry they're in. Because if there is something like biology, you know, I would definitely expect that people are more likely to go to more traditional sources. Or if it was something related to, you know, construction, project delivery, etc., I think using AI will actually be more suitable.
I think there's a stigma thing as well, and I bet you that 10% isn't actually accurate. I bet you this is what they've asked people. I bet you a lot of people have been careful with the truth, shall we say, because as a serious researcher, there's a stigma attached to saying I used AI, because it's like, well, you're not doing it yourself. So there's more to it than meets the eye, and that's why you've always got to take these stats and research articles with a pinch of salt. But you know, I think you're also right there. I think there is still a lot of value in doing the digging and the research, rather than just getting some kind of summary that's been generated by artificial intelligence.
Because also, if you think about it, as a researcher, right, you're trying to uncover and find new meaning and new value of things that don't currently exist. So if you're seeing what you're researching through an AI tool, you can probably guess that other people have also found that out themselves. So you're looking at things that don't typically exist, which won't be scrolled through with some of these AI systems.
Well, that's the creative part. Again, it's like we've said a few times, AI is only as good as the data it's been trained on at the moment.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you're trying to create something new, whether that's a piece of art, whether that's a song, or whether that's a piece of research, you're absolutely right. All the AI is going to do is regurgitate what it's been trained on. But, you know, well worth checking out that piece of research. Again, it's in the newsletter. We'll put the link in the show notes too. Just another couple of pieces, and just for everyone's knowledge. Within the newsletter that we publish, there's loads of news, and we've got all the links that we're following as well. But we pick on the 4 big ones, which is the big news of the week: what's new in productivity, what's new in projects, and what's new in tech. So that's what we're talking about here, but there's a lot more in there as well. But the one around productivity was 𝗀𝗏GPT, which you brought up, I think, 𝗀𝗏cie, because there's starting to be a few people given preliminary access. I'm still not one of them. I'm still on the wait list. In fact, I'm still on the wait list for voice, which is getting extremely annoying, and I don't know how much longer I can wait. But the reviews are in for 𝗀𝗏GPT, and they're pretty positive so far. I was worried that they were going to really struggle to keep up with Perplexity, but the general vibe has been that it's pretty good. And we've got a demo. If you go to the newsletter, there's actually a video showing a demo of 𝗀𝗏GPT if you want to check it out. But what was your take on it?
So I find this really interesting, because I remember when Sam Altman initially tweeted, "We think there is room to make search much better than it is today." So he was kind of throwing shade at Google and a few other search engines. But then when they released kind of the information around 𝗀𝗏GPT, it was interesting at the forefront, right? Because with 𝗀𝗏GPT, if you can have similar user interface to what ChatGPT, if people are very familiar with it. So if you're trying to take some of that engagement away from Google, this would be the perfect place to do that. And we're looking at some of the reviews. What I would say is that dependent on what you're looking to use these search engines for will give you an idea of which one to use. So looking at all the different reviews across Reddit and YouTube and all these different things, people are saying 𝗀𝗏GPT is very good at summarizing content, as you would expect, because obviously ChatGPT was very good at doing that. And it can provide a lot of sources or information in terms of where it pulled the information from. However, it still has the propensity to hallucinate to a lot more than what Perplexity will. So with Perplexity, it may not compile or summarize information as well, but it does give you the sources which are a lot more accurate, and it gives you a lot more detail. Now, so I thought to myself, okay, well then these things will surely take over Google. And it might not. And the reason for that is because, market share. So Google has been dominant within the search market. We know that. But also with Google, you get this kind of autonomy or flexibility. So with ChatGPT and a lot of these generative tools, they prescribe you information, right? Because it's conversation. With Google, it gives you a list, and then you go and do your own research. So I think with Google, they still have that flexibility and autonomy. People reporting back saying that, Google still has that. So again, it depends on what you want to use it for. 𝗀𝗏GPT for summarizing information, and putting things together. Google for more in-depth research and flexibility, and Perplexity if you want to get loads of sources and really follow a thread of information, which is probably the best at.
And you've touched on something really, really important there with these AI tools. Don't have to. It's not like choosing your favorite rock band. And you only listen to them. Every one of them is useful. And think of it as a toolbox. And you've got these different models that you use for different things, depending. And in fact, I think it's something that we could do is like a bit of a cheat sheet about what is good for each use case. ChatGPT is good for certain things. Perplexity is better for if you want citations and you don't want it to hallucinate. And just use the right tool for the right job. I mean, there's no point in complaining if you're using the wrong size screwdriver on the wrong screw, So it's exactly the same thing. It's like understanding all these different AI tools, understanding what they're good at, understanding what they're not so good at, and then using the appropriate tool at the appropriate time.
Yeah, and this is where the learning gap comes in, right? Because when ChatGPT first came out, no one really knew how to use generative AI. Now you fast forward to today, we've got so many different techniques as to how we can get the most out of AI, right? Like I mentioned, Anthropic released one recently, and they were giving things about role prompts. And role prompts are all focused about, when you're going to ask AI a question, give it a role. So say you are a researcher within Science Direct or a very respectable journal or something like that. And the responses you get back are a lot different, So all these different things, all these different techniques that we learn on the way only really comes from using these tools and understanding it a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. The last one I just wanted to touch on before we go on to the interview was so Amazon have got a relationship going with Claude, with Anthropic, to build in Claude to Alexa. And so this is going head to head now with Siri, Apple's Siri, with OpenAI. So the next few months are going to be, let's see what happens. It's going to be the battle of the voice assistants, isn't it?
Yeah, and the reason why I picked this one out, because I've been immersed and fascinated into when these companies are going to put them into their home devices, because I use my home device quite a bit.
Do you use it though? So that's a question I'd just like to stay on for a second, because I feel like a lot of people have over the smart assistants, and I know in our home we basically use it to start and stop music and set a timer for the oven, and that's about it, because they're just not that reliable yet. So do you is
A
that
lot.
keep
So
up?
I use it to ask me the time. I use it to check the weather today. I've got smart plugs in my house, so I'll ask
Yeah.
it to turn off certain lights of the day, and it will do it for me. You've got like intercoms and all these different things, but where it's limited is its ability to really have a conversation with you.
Yeah,
It will always say,
yeah.
"I can't do that," or "Set it to your iPhone," for instance. So where I'm interested is its ability to have a conversation without me having to have my phone about or plug anything else in. I just have the conversation in the house. Now, when I was looking what Amazon are doing with Claude and implementing it within their smart assistant was because Amazon's in-house AI isn't great, and also this allows them to compete on all fronts, right? So
Yeah.
I think this is great timing, and people are trusting Anthropic. Like you mentioned, they've just signed that agreement with the US Safety Institute. They've just released their guide, so they're in a good stead in everyone's eyes, right? So this collaboration is really cool. When I was looking at the features. Like I mentioned, with the limit of now some of these home assistants, these new home assistants will have, these new virtual assistants will now have conversational depth memory. And we know memory is definitely king, because the ability to learn from past interactions with yourself, what sort of food you're cooking, it's a lot easier for you to have that information. It says complex task handling. So it mentions ordering dinner to drafting emails. Now, I'm quite skeptical about the ability for AI to actually execute end-to-end tasks. So writing emails, yeah, fine. But then ordering dinner, I mean, are you really going to trust an AI to pick out the pizza you want, deliver it, add the vouchers in? I don't know.
I don't even trust myself to do that, to be honest.
Yeah, so that's the one where I feel like I really want to see how that pans out. It's got these tailored recommendations. Now, you can kind of look at this to be a bit more scary, because personalization, people kind of go two different ways in terms of if they feel it to be a good thing or a bad thing, because you might get a sense of something being invasive. But, this can personalize suggestions regarding shopping, news, entertainment. So I think that's an interesting thing. Connecting it to your smart home will be awesome. And then it says, detailed assistance. So we can walk you through very specific things like cookbook guides and all that. So I think that's interesting. Now, the reason why they've seemed to have done this is because Alexa itself apparently isn't doing very well commercially. So what
I think
they're trying to do,
it reached a plateau, didn't it?
It reached a plateau,
who's going to have one has got one now.
Yeah, exactly. And then now they're saying they need a new pricing model. So they've got this freebies premium version, so you can pay a certain monthly subscription to have that capability. But they're competing with Apple, they're competing with Google. Google have released theirs, Apple haven't yet. They're supposed to do it with the macOS Sequoia, and I think the later part of this year, but we'll see. Just in terms of why people should care about this, James, is that within a project context, we're constantly looking at a lot of visual information, right? Different sort of visual charts and information reports, Power BI, there's loads of it. And I think this ability to communicate as a conversation vocally takes away some of that kind of visual stress that you get consistently. So I think it's just a new way of consuming information.
Yeah, it's all good. It'll be interesting to see how the Apple's offering does come out, whether that's going to be a subscription or whether that's a free part of the Apple offering, which they often do to entice you over to the Apple ecosystem. So all interesting stuff. So again, that story's on the newsletter. The only other thing to make you aware of for the listeners is that Oprah is going to be doing an interview with Sam Altman and Bill Gates on the 12th of September, and we will bring you coverage of that as and when it happens. But if you want the link to the details, I don't think the exact time has been broadcast yet, but that's on the newsletter. And of course, there is the podcast that we did last week with Anthony Slumbers on there. So do check it out, do subscribe, and do sort of share it with your network, because we're trying to bring you the condensed version of everything that's happened in AI in project delivery in the week. So without further ado, we'll now go on to the interview with Cecilia Longstrom. Today we have Cecilia Longstrom from 𝗀𝗽𝗍𝗄𝗄 Studio with us to talk about the recently released AI and the Built Environment report. This was a brilliant report and an event I went to a few months ago, and I met Cecilia at the event and I asked if she could come onto the podcast, and she's very happily obliged. So welcome to Project 𝗲𝗀, Cecilia.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
It's a pleasure, and thank you so much for all the work you've put into the report. I think it was a much needed publication in the industry, and it's judging by the response you got at Arup's offices, I think it was a pretty much sold out event. It's a very much a talking point in the industry. And in the time that's passed since the event, I think the talking and the noise has only increased, if anything. So it was an extremely important report to frame AI around the built environment and around specifically London. And what I'm going to do now is, for those looking on YouTube, I'm quickly going to flash the report so you can see what it looks like. There you go. And we'll put it all in the show notes so you can download it and have a look at all the recommendations. It's a very far-reaching report with a lot of good work that's gone into to the recommendations that come out of that. We'll delve into some of the findings. I mean, we were saying before we started recording the podcast, Cecilia, that we could probably make this a 5-hour episode quite easily and talk about everything. So we're going to be quite brutal, if you like, and sort of go into some of the main findings. But before we ask you some questions, can I firstly sort of ask you what you were most pleased about in terms of the way the research came about, and perhaps what the biggest challenges were?
Yeah, I think, there's obviously, I'll start with the challenges. There's obviously a huge challenge around understanding how AI is going to affect us. I think that goes across society. It's not just in the built environment. But I think everyone has sort of some degree of anxiety around how AI is going to pan out, how it will affect us, how it will affect our jobs, and any upskillings and skills that's required. Will it replace us? Will it sort of outsmart us eventually and sort of take over? What's the future of AI? So I think that was a big concern, and the challenges around is kind of trying to find some sort of general consensus around these topics. I think there aren't really any, to be honest, because you speak to different practitioners and they all have a slightly different view on things. Some might think that, in the future, my dad will be able to design his own house using an AI tool and not have a professional involved to build it. Whereas others would completely, they would definitely not agree with that and think that there's a real value in having the professional still in the loop, and that we are really going to be essential to the future of our industry, and that this is really just a tool that will amplify and speed up and make us more efficient. So I think the challenges is trying to find, there's common ground. There's definitely common ground, but there are tangents going in all different directions, and trying to sort of bring them together. And I guess also being honest with that and showing that there are differences of opinions and we don't really know what our future is going to look like. So one of the challenges as well is that our outlook is limited, and we are being honest with that in the report. And we're saying that we can look ahead maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years into the future, but after that, the gaze ahead becomes very hazy and we can't really see what's ahead of us. And I think, when we talk about what AI might be in 10 or 15 years time, we don't really know. And therefore we're sort of trying to adapt and be agile in a current climate, in a future trajectory that we're embarking on at pace, without knowing what it means to us and how we need to live with it and how we will adapt it, both in our personal lives, but also in our professional lives. And I think that was the big challenge. And then I think, in terms of what came out of it, I found some reassurance in the fact that there's a real sort of common, there's a real common ground around the role of the professional, that we won't be sort of displaced entirely by AI. And I think that was comforting to hear, because I came into this research process as well, not really knowing what I was going to find. It was a learning process for me, very much so. But it was comforting to hear from all of these different experts in the realm of AI who work with it on a day-to-day basis, that the professional skill and the human discernment is very much still in focus. But this gives us an opportunity to kind of lay to the side some of the really tedious stuff that we never wanted to do in the first place. Like, no one went to school to do door schedules, coloring plans. So there's also an excitement from professionals that some of the stuff that we really don't want to do on a day-to-day basis, we can automate.
Yeah,
And then we
absolutely.
can actually focus in on what is our core skills, where we can really add value and where we can find more joy in our work. So I think it's a complicated picture, but I think those were some of the challenges and
Mm.
some of the real kind of positives that came out of the findings, I think.
So on that,
But
Cecilia, you mentioned, when you came in to start to researching this report, you didn't know too much
No.
about AI, especially within this industry. So having done that research, was there anything that surprised you?
Yeah, I think there's lots of things that surprised me with the research. I think that,
that's a sign of good research, isn't it? When you
yeah,
get
I think that's part of a creative process. Isn't that the
Mm,
case? Like if you
mm,
end up with what you thought you'd end up with, then you missed something, you've done something wrong, right? Because you haven't
yeah,
been on an explorative process. I think some of the questions around what AI might turn into in the future,
yeah,
there's a real conversation around AGI, artificial general intelligence. We talked about this to some extent, James,
yeah.
and this big unknown of what AI will become. And AGI is essentially when AI starts to take on cognitive abilities.
And the reality is nobody knows that. So I think
Exactly.
that doesn't surprise me that was the kind of one of the unknowns within the report, because
Yeah,
even the AI experts can't agree on what AGI even is, never
yeah,
mind about when it's going to happen.
exactly. So Google's deep minds are sort of forecasting that we're 10 years away from AGI.
Mm, mm,
But currently, we don't have the energy supply to actually drive that forward. I
Mm.
mean, that's another aspect of it that's hugely complicated and might put spanners in the works of AI moving forward that I wasn't really aware of, the kind of surprise element of, how energy intense AI
yeah.
is, the infrastructure that goes with it, and, the complications around sustainability, around energy centers that are uh, they create a lot of heat, essentially. You need to cool them, and
Mm,
then massive amounts of water is required to cool these down. But also these sort of political landscapes and where you place these. A lot of data centers might, be placed in China, for example, and
Mm.
how does that sort of fit with our sort of political climate, and also does that create delay in our systems? And there's all of these sort of considerations around AI that we might not think about. That's going to be, key factors in how things play out in the future.
And did that come up in the research? Were there concerns around, say, we're talking about security,
Yeah.
sustainability?
Yeah, there's definitely concern about sustainability. I think a lot of the practitioners that I spoke to, because they don't really know how the different AI systems are using data, there's a
Mm,
big concern around even making data available. So, if you have something that is original material, you don't want it to be uploaded to a cloud where it can be used to train systems essentially, and then kind of find its way in one shape or another, even if it's really transformed into other AI outputs. So you could see
Mm.
remnants of your work in some kind of mid-journey creation down the line that
yeah.
it's picked up on the internet, right? So I think it's that real concern about protecting your copyright and your intellectual property and anonymizing anything that goes beyond the confines of your practice, and being really sort of careful with sort of copyrighting everything and not really knowing where the law is going to go.
Mm,
Legislation around this is really scant at the moment. So how will the law protect you against any copyright issues? Can you even copyright AI produced material?
mm,
It's all of these kinds of concerns that are being flagged when people start using it. And it means that, there's a reluctance to use some of the software that's coming available now, if you don't know exactly how it's going to use your data. And I found that some practitioners were not really willing to use certain tools unless that was really clear. And I think that's something that we're going to see more and more as well. And I hope that practices, particularly sort of the bigger practices that have the sort of in-house capacities to set up policies and frameworks around AI, will do so to protect
mm,
themselves from having their designs kind of just migrating away from them and turning up somewhere else in a
mm.
different format.
But I find that quite interesting, because a lot of people have used the AI to raise concerns about copyright and
Mm.
data privacy, which is all absolutely valid. But a lot of it's just common sense. And it's like you talked about copywriting stuff and being careful with your data. That's just stuff you should do anyway. So what I find is that when you strip it back to like, well, what's our AI policy? Often it's nothing to do with AI. It's just good general practice anyway. And the other thing that I think is quite interesting from the people who say, well, I'm not going to use one of these AI tools because I'm concerned about giving my data away. They're the same people that might be using third-party software tools, and they've been giving their data away for the last 20 years without worrying about it once. So it's created a different benchmark and a different framework for people to think about it, which is a good thing, but also they shouldn't let that hinder them. If they've been so, not necessarily lax is the wrong word, but you know, they've allowed things to go over the last decade by using software as a service tools, then why are they using AI with a different level of
And just on that, I thought that the report, what it did really well was giving accounts from both the public and the private sector in terms of this concerns around safety. Having done that research, Cecilia, and looking into, you know, what some of these companies are doing and some of these public sector organizations are doing, who do you think will lead the way in terms of regulating some of these policies?
Well, I, in terms of regulation, we're really waiting for the new government to make a statement around AI. So the last government did have a white paper in place, but was regulating with existing data. And I think the new government has made some statements in the King's speech around how they will regulate the use of AI, and seem to
quite
be
vague though, wasn't it?
very vague, but it seems like they are intent on being a bit more stringent perhaps with the legislation. We'll see what will come out of that. But in terms of who will drive the evolution and the integration of AI, you know, we're looking at a public sector that is very resource strapped. And I think in some parts of the country, you do have local authorities who are very much, you know, on the forefront and who will be part of driving this. So in London, we do have, for example, the City of London Corporation, who are developing, they've got some funding to develop a new app that will integrate AI, which is really exciting because that will then provide opportunities for users, whether it's professionals, to better understand some of their policies. So for example, they're taking policies that would have traditionally been worded and turn them into an actual tool that will interface with some of the AI software that the built environment professionals will use, which means that will be much easier to then clarify what actually what regulation is. And then it also has the capacity to make it much easier for people who are more on the recipient end, who might be stakeholders or part of the public, members of the public, who are not particularly perhaps excited about sitting down and reading really heavy documents with lots of jargon or interpret plans, to make it much more accessible. So that will be really exciting to see. And I think when it comes to the public sector, we will probably have certain local authorities, planning authorities, who will be at the forefront and drive it. And I think, you know, collaboration and sharing the lessons learned between different public authorities, local authorities, will probably be quite critical, just to make sure that, you know, all of the authorities are keeping pace, because the private sector is going to race ahead really quickly. And if we, you know, one of the huge benefits of AI is that it could speed up the whole process of taking buildings from the, you know, the concept stage, the design stage, to actual being built and delivered on site. But part of that, you know, big hurdle is the planning process, which takes time because it's manual. Everything is processed manually. So if we can find ways of speeding that system, that process up, then, you know, we can gain multiple benefits. And one being that, you know, a lot of the actors who currently can't hold land for that amount of time, because it's expensive, they might be able to actually become part of the game and part of delivering much needed housing and development for the UK. But if there are elements of that process that's holding it up, like if, for example, local authorities in certain parts of the countries are not keeping pace with that process, then we're still looking at a slow system. even if other parts of the process is pacing ahead. So
Just
I
like
think,
lowest common denominator if someone's holding the rest
yeah,
back effectively.
exactly. So I think it's a case of helping each other here, and I'm not really sure who's going to lead it. We also have a data access issue where, you know, a lot of the data that's required for these processes are dispersed across many different institutions or local authorities. And you can see that today, even between sort of two local authority in the boundary line, you know, there's sort of those boundary lines are always tricky because there's no sort of, you know, that sort of transfer of data is an issue. So I think also making that data, you know, centralizing it and making it accessible is going to be a key part of this process as well, and speeding things up. And as of today, there's no, you know, no one has taken ownership of that process. And we don't really know how it's going to happen, but it will need to happen, and it's going to be really critical that it's an efficient process. Someone takes it on, but also that data becomes available to everyone. So it doesn't become a case of those who can have it and those who can't have it.
Well, that was one of the key sort of recommendations. And I remember at the event as well, in the follow-up questions, that was one of the big things around, you know, data being important and pooling our data and sharing our data. I mean, we've touched on a few of the recommendations. Do you want to just sort of summarize what the key recommendations of the report were as well for the listeners?
Yeah, I can certainly do that. So there's a few different things that really are going to be critical as we adapt to an AI future. And sort of we talked on about some of them, but there will be impacts on jobs. Some jobs will disappear, you know, but we also have new jobs that will be created. And I think we need to think about it almost in the way that, you know, when we entered into the internet era, and look back then, you know, all of the jobs that have been created with this new technology. And I think that AI might work in a similar way. So there will be, you know, you won't have your fax, you know, the guy comes and fixes your fax machine anymore. But, you know, there are new jobs that have been created as part of like the internet. And I think it'll be the same for AI. You know, there'll be jobs that we won't do anymore, but new jobs will be created.
So but just on that, and Cecilia, because on the report I noticed there was a question around, you know, are people concerned that AI will change their role? And one thing I noticed that it was almost a 50-50 split between those who were saying yes and no. Why do you think that split is so equal? What do you think behind that?
I don't know. And I think it goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning, where, you know, this is really polarized. AI debate is polarized. Some people are super excited about it and they think, wow, amazing opportunities that's going to come ahead. And I will be able to do much more in my job. I will be able to do more exciting things and be quicker. Maybe I can work a shorter week. And there will be people who think, you know, this is really scary because my job might be sort of automated and might not be needed anymore. I might need to reskill in my 50s and get another job. And then that's scary. So I think maybe it's just about perception and about your understanding and your outlook, and whether you're excited and see sort of the potential opportunities from it, or whether it scares you.
Could you go on, James?
I was just going to say, I think that's a really valid point, because I think, and that's why, and we say this quite a lot, that's why we do this podcast, and that's why we do the newsletter, because it's around letting people know this is nothing to be scared of, because we don't want people to be scared, because this is an opportunity. I see it as an opportunity. But I had something happen quite recently, which made me realise exactly what you talk about, which is somebody who dismissed the use of a certain tool, a certain AI tool, because they thought it was too difficult. But when I showed it to them, and they were like, is that it? I can do that. That was it. And they just didn't know. And that's why I think so. Doing things like this and telling people and doing the research that you're doing is so vital, because even if it changes one person, if one person reads your report and from that they've embraced it and they're changing the way they work, then it's worth it.
Yeah. I think it's probably that it's also this big unknown, right? It's sort of steeped in mystery, AI, to a lot of people. It was to me, and it still is to me. So I think it's, you know, it's also about demystifying it to some extent, and actually understanding that what it is it's a tool that will help us. That's what it is right now. That might look different in 10 years' time, but right now that's what we're dealing with. And perhaps it's also that case of sort of looking into the future, not really admitting that we don't know what's going to happen. Maybe that's a scary part as well.
Yeah, and I think that unknown is really interesting, because when I looked at the data, it was saying that people were worried that the biggest concern was that people were saying that with AI, we might become too over-reliant and too focused on, becoming a cognitive miser, because AI can do a lot of this work. Now, typically with some of the technological revolutions, we become more productive.
Yep.
So this dichotomy is interesting, and you can kind of see the signs of uncharted lands, in the sense that, how do we then define productivity? Because if AI is doing a lot of the work for us, it evolves the work that we do. We're still more productive, but not productive in the same sense that we are now. And I think that's a really interesting thing that the report kind of highlighted.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point that was made as well through conversation, that, looking back at the office in the 70s, when and 80s, when personal computer came about, and we thought that it was going to take over, and we didn't really have to do any work because no one has to sort of sit and write 5 copies of the same letter anymore. That we could just sort of downscale and sort of take half the time off and do all of the work we had to do in the shortest space of time. But actually, we've just done more, and it's probably a precursor of what's going to happen as well with AI. It's probably not going to be a case of us just sitting back and relaxing whilst automation's taking place. We're probably just going to do a lot more, and we're going to be more efficient, and we'll have more, compelling outcomes as a result of it, more accurate outcomes, hopefully.
Yeah. So the 3-day week that's been talked about, and universal income, I think that, it's interesting to see how it's going to go, because a lot of people say, well, it is different this time, but then there is that school of thought as well. Well, we've been here before, and we're all working harder than ever. So just one of the other key recommendations that came out of it, and this is something that's very passionate, close to my heart, is around the reskilling and preparing professionals.
Yeah.
That was very, very clear, both in the report and in the presentation, that people understand that they need this reskilling. How do you think that could work, though, in a industry that is quite conservative and not always ready for change?
Yeah, I think there are probably different elements of the industry where the uptake will happen at different pace, probably different parts of the industry. So I think it's first of all, I think it's understanding that we need those basic skills. We're not going to be able to circumnavigate it because we have AR at our service. So we're still going to need those skills, and our discernment and our creativity is still going to have to be part of it. And then I think it's probably a case of, we're all gonna have to learn on the job a little bit and be open-minded. And there were a lot of people that I talked to who work in different practices and organizations who are doing, they have in-house focus groups, they're testing systems, they're trying to keep pace with it. And they are providing also different kinds of training for people in-house. At the moment, we're looking at a myriad of different AI tools that are sort of flooding the market, and it will probably happen for a while. But sort of one of the things that came out as well is we'll probably see a streamlining over time, and there'll probably be, to a certain degree, some of the bigger players that will sort of absorb some of the smaller kind of startups and integrate some of the innovations into their sort of more mainstream software, which might mean that we're looking at a less kind of chaotic and overwhelming situation when it comes to sort of what tools we might use and what we might need to learn. But then, it's at the moment, it's just a real challenge for practitioners to keep pace with what's coming out on the market. I think there's a real hunger and excitement to learn. And from the survey as well, we could really see that most people were really excited to learn about AI and know more about AI, and will be very quick to sort of want to pick up these skills. But it's about that responsibility, I think, for each organization to integrate and to provide the training and to ensure that we're staying that we're staying abreast with the development. But I mean, we talked about this as well, James, and I think that's an interesting point that you made around us having a collective responsibility around the types of tools that we develop and how AI is going to work for us as a built environment industry.
Definitely.
And that rather than everyone going away and developing their own types of software and tools. So I think that's a really good point as well. And maybe there's a coming together of the sector to help each other and finding ways of sort of navigating this quite challenging journey.
Yeah, because I think what we talked about is that, whilst that great consolidation that you talked about is inevitable, you can look at it as a positive light, but that's also monopolization as well. You're going to get 2 or 3 major companies running it. And that's my fear, always has been with this, is that as we're able to sort of automate and augment a lot of the processes, that these big companies will effectively take control of the industry, which is why I think the institutions have such a key role in this, in saying what people can and can't do. And it's good to see them so on the ball with it. So, the APM conference this year was all around AI. The MPA, which is the Major Projects Association conference, is going to be around AI. So it's not like they're ignoring the situation. But I think that sometimes with the training piece, a lot of people are like, yeah, I want to train, but I don't know what to train. We're not trying to make that. And the thing is, it's you've got to separate the technical from the cultural, right? What we're not trying to do is turning everyone into data scientists. But what we do want people to do is understand how to utilize these tools. So they're not necessarily even technical training sessions. There may be a bit of technicals, how to use the software, but a lot of them are really intuitive and easy to use anyway, right?
So on that, Jamie, then quickly, a question for you is what you just mentioned. So do you think the most important thing for people to learn in the industry is being able to integrate and use these AI tools?
Yeah, I think it's having the courage and the understanding to use them and not sort of leave them because you're not sure about whether you've got the capabilities to do it. When actually, like when I used the example from before, when you show it to somebody, they go, oh, that's it. None of them are that difficult to use. The smart people who have created these tools for us to use, and the back end is extremely complicated, but the front end is meant to be simple because they're meant to be for the consumer.
So would you both then argue that, because Cecilia, you mentioned in the report, and I've told this a few times, that a human advantage that we have is the ability to discern from the AI outputs. So what would you say is more important? Is the ability to integrate and use these AI tools, or focusing more on our strength, which sets us apart, which is the ability to discern the information we get? If you were to choose which is more important in terms of upskilling, what would you say? I
really don't. I think they go hand in hand. I really think that there's no one without the other, and I think it's really evident that we really need to be involved in the process. We can't leave anything to AI and assume that it's going to produce something that is then buildable in the end. It's not going to produce a finished output. So it really needs to be a sort of working. That's one of the big challenges, right? Is where the human intelligence meet the artificial intelligence. But the way that we talked about it in the report is that it's like a bookending approach where it's really important that the human is really there to set the problem, because what AI does, it solves a mathematical problem for you. That's all it does. It doesn't have a smartness other than that, really. And so that might change though. So we're talking about now, the here and the now. So it's really important that you, as a professional, set the problem in such a way and feed, and ensure that quality data is fed into your system so that it generates a quality outcome. Because the outcome is only going to be as good as the data that you feed into it and the problem that you set. So, we can't rely on AI in itself to produce a quality outcome from us. We really need to be invested in that process, and what comes out at the end needs to be elevated by the professional as well, need to be checked and verified, and also elevated into something that we can then take to a site, or that becomes a product in the end.
I actually love that, the bookending, because I've been saying the human in the loop for quite a while, but actually the finding is absolutely right. You need somebody to set the brief. At this point in time, and I'm the same as you can only got a sort of 5-10 year time scale, but at the moment you need to tell the AI what to do. Then you let it do it, but then you need to check it and verify it. And then you've got the best combination of human and algorithm together.
Right.
And do you think that's something which is specific to the AEC industry, or do you think it's something which can extrapolate to other industries?
I think it goes across anyone who uses AI. I think that's really critical. And we've seen it as well, in other scenarios as well, where, the importance of training your systems well, for example, and using the appropriate data that's context specific, and that is like representative and culturally sensitive and all of these things, so that that's another issue, the bias that can sneak into, algorithmic systems and AI, so that we don't end up with something that is like essentially a prejudiced system in the end. So that's something to be really wary of. And so we need to be really skilled in how we train our systems. We need to understand our data, and that's there's a real challenge around quality of data and how to ensure that the data that we feed our AI tools are of high quality, essentially, because it was a point that was made during the launch. How can it's not even that easy with architecture to say that something's good or bad. It's not that black and white. So how can we determine that a building is culturally sensitive to its context?
They mentioned in the report that the AI can do a lot of the quantitative stuff for you, but it's the ability to leverage the qualitative data, understanding communities and engaging with people is the key. And that thing really stuck out to me in the report, and I thought you eloquated that really well.
Right. Well, I think that's a really, really important point, because that one aspect of this is obviously that you can do site assessments really quickly, and AI can help you generate thousands of options for a site. But it's not going to be a good proposition if it's not sensitive to its context. If you don't understand the socioeconomic climate and environment that you work in, for example, or if you don't understand the actual physical context. So there needs to be, like, you need to apply yourself as a professional to this process to ensure that what you're producing is not really a optimized development proposals that yields loads and loads of units for a good price, but that it is actually also appropriate, and it's it represents good placemaking, because that essentially is what we want to do in the end. And I think what AI can help us do is to make that process more efficient, so that we can be more involved in the vision, more involved in the brief development, and more involved in then amplifying the results towards something that can really create a better city for us. So that's where hopefully we can divert our attention to, from doing all of this repetitive stuff to actually doing the quality stuff.
Yeah. And you mentioned the word bias there, and it's such an important point, and it's something we could talk about on a whole separate podcast. But even the Googles are falling foul of that in terms of how do you train these models because it's only as good as the data it's been trained on. So it's a huge subject. But like I said at the beginning, Cecilia, we could easily, I kind of predicted we could talk about this for 5 hours, but I think that's true. But we are sort of approaching the end of the podcast. But I would just like to sort of give you the final word. Is there anything else you'd like to make the listeners aware of before we sign off?
No, I mean, read the report. You'll provide a link, I hope, in the show notes, which would be great. And I think actually what you were saying, James, earlier on is just to not fear it, but just kind of approach it and embrace it. And I think be curious and try things out. And I think it's probably going to come across as a lot less scary and intimidating than we might think it is. And I think we're just going to have to be very agile and dynamic as we venture into an unknown future.
Absolutely.
And hopefully we'll also have the regulation in place so that we know that we can do this safely. But that's another question that's too, I think, complex to touch upon here. But I think embrace it with curiosity.
Are you planning on any follow-up research with it? Or?
Not as of yet, but if it feels like it's a topic that's going to be covered extensively in the future, so I wouldn't be surprised if we get more commissions to do this type of work.
We'll wait with bated breath. But Cecilia, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for the work that you put into the report. It's extremely, extremely valuable. I urge everyone to download a copy. As I said, the link will be in the show notes. But until next week, and thank you again, Cecilia.
Thank you so much for having me.
Just want to give a big shout out to our sponsors, Construct AI. For anyone interested in looking at Construct AI, the link's in our show notes. There's a free tier that you can play around with. 𝗀̱cie and I have been using it for a good year since it was originally launched. and we get a huge amount of value out of it. So I thoroughly encourage everyone to go onto the Construct AI site and have a play around.
Cool. And guys, before we sign off, please don't forget to share, follow, and like all of our stuff. So that helps us to engage with you and understand a bit more about what you want so we can bring it to your doorstep as early as possible.